In the year 1869, farmer Jacob Wilkins and his 16-year-old daughter Sarah set out across the woods of Gallia County, Ohio to gather winter supplies. They were pulling an empty wagon along a road where, 3 weeks earlier, a hunter had found a woven nest the size of a barn and bones inside. Deer, bears, and perhaps more. The horse refused to go beyond a certain point, whimpering and shaking, and at night they heard a cry. Not human, not animal. Something in between. What they encountered in that fog left inch-deep scars on my father's shoulder, and memories that neither time nor distance can erase. So before we continue, please make sure you're subscribed and let us know where you're watching from. Thank you. I was 16 when I realized that something was living in the forests of Ohio that shouldn't be there. The morning of November 1st, 1869 greeted us with a cold that was out of character with the October warmth of the previous week. The temperature had dropped overnight, and the air pressed a heavy dampness against our faces, making it difficult to breathe deeply. The drizzling rain turned the road into a mess of mud and fallen leaves, and the fog lay thick over the ground, obscuring everything beyond 20 meters. My father said the fog was unusual for this time of year. Too thick, too low, as if the earth were exhaling something that had accumulated under the roots. Our cart was sturdy. My father had built it himself 3 years ago from oak planks, fastened with iron bolts and coated with tar at the joints. The wheels were shod with iron, and the axles were greased with lard every spring. At the bottom lay sacks of flour and salt, barrels of molasses, hemp ropes rolled into rings, and a spare wheel tied to the back with an iron rod in the hub. Under the seat, my father kept a .40 caliber flintlock musket, a horn with gunpowder, a pouch with lead bullets, and spare flints wrapped in oiled cloth. I sat next to my father on a wooden bench, covered with a woolen cloak that was damp with moisture and smelled of wet sheep. Jacob Wilkins, my father, was a 42-year-old man with the broad shoulders of a lumberjack and hands roughened by the axe and the plow. He wore a worn felt hat with upturned brims, a leather jacket with patches on the elbows, and knee-high boots that he repaired himself every winter. He had a thick graying mustache and calm gray eyes. He held the reins in his left hand, while his right rested on his knee, ready to grab a whip or musket if necessary. We were carrying rye bread baked by my mother the day before, dried venison in a canvas bag, autumn apples in a basket, and a flask of water. We planned to reach the town of Rio Grande by evening, buy flour, salt, molasses, gunpowder, nails, visit my mother's uncle, spend the night, and return the next day. It was our last trip before winter. The road took 4 hours one way if the weather was favorable. We left at dawn, when the sky was just beginning to turn gray above the tops of the maple and oak trees. The horse, a 13-year-old bay gelding named Jake, heavy and reliable, walked at a steady pace, snorting in the fog. The wheels creaked in the ruts filled with yesterday's water. The road led south through a mixed forest of oaks, maples, and beeches, with willows and alders in the lowlands. Tall grass, 5 or 6 feet high, grew along the roadside, bowing under the weight of the rain. Ferns filled the spaces between the trees, creating green walls that seemed impenetrable. The first 2 hours passed without incident. We passed the Mackenzie farm, where smoke rose in a straight column from the chimney. We crossed the bridge over Reason Creek, where the water flowed fast and dark after the night's rain. My father spoke little. He was a man of few words, but his silence was calm and familiar. I looked at the forest, at how the fog clung to the lower branches, how raindrops gathered on the leaves and fell in heavy streams. By 10 o'clock in the morning, we reached the last farm before the entrance to the dense forest, the home of old hunter Ezra Collins. He was standing at his gate with a rifle in his hands when we approached. His face was gray and tired. Collins raised his hand, signaling us to stop. Father pulled on the reins. The old man approached the wagon and looked at my father for a long time. He said we shouldn't drive through the forest at dusk. Something had been roaming there for the past 3 weeks. Yesterday, he found a woven nest the size of a barn, and inside were bones. Deer, bears, and maybe more. His dog refused to go any further, whimpering and shaking as if in a fever. And the night before last, he heard a cry. Not human, not animal, something in between, rising and falling like waves. He asked us to spend the night at his place and leave in the morning. Father thanked him, but said we had to make it today. The snow could come any day, and the road would become impassable. We have a musket, and there is still plenty of daylight left. We will be back before dark." Collins looked at me, then back at my father. He said that the musket might not help against whatever was out there, but he didn't insist. He just warned us that if we heard anything strange, we shouldn't stop, but whip the horse and not look back. We moved on. The road narrowed after Collins' farm. The trees closed in on both sides, their branches meeting overhead to form a tunnel of gray wood and wet bark. The fog grew thicker. Visibility dropped to 15 meters. The sound of wheels and hooves was muffled, as if the forest absorbed every noise and returned no echo. Around noon, I noticed the silence. It wasn't gradual, but sudden, as if someone had covered the world with a heavy blanket. There were no birds to be heard. Not a single crow, not a single woodpecker, not a single blackbird's song. No rustling of squirrels in the branches, no scurrying of mice in the grass. Only raindrops, the creaking of wheels, and Jake's heavy breathing. I told my father about it. He nodded but didn't stop. He said the animals were hiding from the storm. But the sky didn't look stormy, just gray, low, and uniform. 10 minutes later, I smelled something. It came slowly, barely noticeable at first, then stronger and stronger. A sharp, suffocating stench of decay and musk. Not like carrion on the road. I knew that from childhood. It was deeper, more sour, mixed with something pungent that made you wrinkle your nose and breathe through your mouth. The smell of a stinking skunk, only 10 times stronger, mixed with the damp mustiness of a swamp and the sour smell of an unwashed body. Jake smelled it too. He slowed his pace, snorted, and laid his ears back. He began to shift his hooves restlessly. His father pulled the reins a little tighter and placed his right hand on the butt of the musket under the seat. The smell lingered for about 5 minutes, then began to fade. But it didn't disappear completely. A faint trace remained in the air, like a reminder. We continued on our way. Another half hour later, the road led us to a section where the grass on the right was particularly tall. It reached 7 feet, bent under the rain, forming a dense wall of greenery and yellow stalks. Between the grass, I could see the trunks of old oak trees entwined with wild vines. It was there that I saw the structures. 3 cone-shaped structures stood 20 yards from the road, partially hidden by fog and grass. They were about 10 feet high and 12 feet in diameter at the base. They were woven from fresh grass, reeds, and thin willow branches, intertwined with remarkable precision. This was not a random pile created by the wind or animals. It was work, intentional, methodical work. I pointed them out to my father. He stopped the wagon and stared at them for a long time. His face grew stern. We didn't get out to check, but even from the road, we could see that there was something white inside one of the nests. Bones. My father cracked the reins. Jake moved faster. 50 yards away, I saw tracks. They crossed the road at an angle, going from the woods on the left to the grass on the right. Huge prints of bare feet in the mud. I had seen bear tracks before. My father had taught me to recognize them. These were not bear tracks. The shape of a human foot, 5 toes, about 18 inches long, 7 feet wide at the widest point. But the depth of the print was monstrous. More than 3 inches in hard mud that hadn't yet been completely softened by rain. The weight of the creature that left them must have been enormous. The distance between steps was 6 to 7 feet. Father stopped the wagon again. This time he got out, walked over to the footprint and crouched down. I stayed on the bench, holding on to the edge of the seat. He ran his hand over the print without touching it. He looked in the direction the tracks were leading. Then he got up, returned to the wagon, took the musket from under the seat, checked the shelf, and poured in fresh powder. He told me to sit quietly and hold on tight. We moved on, but now my father held the musket across his knees, the trigger cocked. The road began to descend. A stream appeared on the right, hidden by thickets of willow. The water murmured quietly, almost inaudibly in the rain. On the left, the ground rose in a gentle hill covered with windfall and ferns. That's when I heard the sound. At first it was distant, almost indistinguishable. A deep, guttural roar like a bear's growl, but longer and with intonations reminiscent of a human voice. It held a low note for about 10 seconds, then abruptly shifted to a piercing high-pitched squeal. The squeal was deafening even from a distance, forcing me to cover my ears. Jake reared up. His father struggled to hold him, jerked the reins, and shouted a command. The horse lowered himself but continued to shift restlessly, trembling all over. The sound repeated itself. This time it was closer. A dull thudding sound was added to the roar, like blows to a hollow tree trunk. 3 blows. A pause. 3 blows. Then a sharp crack of breaking branches and heavy snorting, like the breathing of a large animal after a long run. My father told me to take the whip. I took it. He said if the horse ran, to hold on with all my strength and not let go. I nodded. We moved on at a walking pace. Every creak of the wheels sounded like thunder. Every splash of hooves in a puddle sounded like a gunshot. To the right, beyond the stream and the willow trees, the forest became particularly dense. There was an old sawmill, abandoned 5 years ago after its owner died of fever. The logs were still stacked in piles, blackened by time and dampness. The mill itself had collapsed. The roof caved in. The ground around the mill was trampled down to bare soil. No grass grew there. There were multiple tracks, as huge as the ones we had seen on the road. They led to the stream, crossed it, and disappeared into the thicket. The trees around the perimeter were stripped. The bark was torn off in strips 7 to 10 feet high, exposing the light wood beneath. Some trunks had deep scratches, 4 parallel grooves as if made by claws. I saw another nest. It was large, 15 feet in diameter at the base. Inside lay bones, lots of bones. A deer skull with a shattered jaw, bare ribs broken in half, something smaller, raccoons perhaps, or dogs, all mixed up with shreds of dark fur and leaves. Long strands of dark brown, almost black fur hung from the branches sticking out of the nest. Stiff and thick like horsehair. Father didn't stop. He cracked the reins. Jake broke into a trot. We passed the mill. The road began to climb again. The fog had lifted a little, and visibility increased to 30 yards. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. There were 3 or 4 hours of daylight left. We were halfway there. Father said we would continue. To turn back would mean passing the mill again. Better to go on, reach the town, and spend the night there if necessary. I agreed. But my hands were shaking as I held the edge of my cloak. The next hour passed in tense silence. The road wound between the hills. The forest receded, opening up glades with tall grass, then closed again with a dense wall of trunks. The rain had stopped, but the fog remained, spreading in ribbons over the ground. Jake walked quickly, almost galloping on the flat sections. Foam appeared on his chest. Father did not stop him. It was about 4 o'clock when we entered the deepest part of the forest. Here the trees grew particularly densely. Old oaks and beeches, trunks 3 feet in circumference, roots protruding above the ground in thick knots. The undergrowth was impenetrable. Thickets of blackberries, hazel bushes, fallen trunks entwined with ivy. On the right, the ground sloped down into a marshy lowland from which rose cold air smelling of rot and stagnant water. It was there that I felt the pressure. Not physical, but palpable. It was as if the air had become denser, pressing on my chest and making it difficult to breathe. My ears were blocked, as if before a thunderstorm, but the sky was not visible through the canopy of branches. Jake felt it too. He slowed down on his own, without being told, and switched to walking pace. His head dropped low, his ears pressed against his skull. His father raised his musket, rested the butt against his shoulder, and kept his finger on the trigger. The silence was absolute. Not a drop of water, not a rustle of leaves, not a crack of a branch. Only our breathing and the creaking of the leather harness. Then I saw it. To the right of the road, 50 feet away, in a gap between the trees, stood a figure. I saw a silhouette. Tall, 8, maybe 9 feet. Massive. Broad shoulders, disproportionately broad for a human. A large head, but its shape was difficult to make out in the fog. Long arms, hanging below where the knees should have been. The figure did not move. It stood motionless, facing the road, facing us. Father jerked the reins. Jake stopped, his whole body shaking. I couldn't take my eyes off it. The figure took a step forward, slow, heavy. The foot rose, then fell. The ground beneath it seemed to tremble. Another step. Now I could see more details. The body was covered in dark fur, gray-brown, long, thick on the shoulders and back. The arms were incredibly long, the palms huge. The head had human features, broad with a flat nose and prominent brow ridges. The mouth was large, and the eyes glowed. They didn't reflect light. They glowed from within, a bright orange-red light like hot coals in the dark. 2 fires fixed on us. Father raised his musket higher. The creature stopped. Its head tilted slightly to the side, studying us. Then it opened its mouth and made a sound, a low roar that turned into a screech. The same sound we had heard before, but now it was 10 times louder, 10 times closer. It pounded in our ears, penetrated our chests, made our hearts beat unevenly. Jake roared in response, rearing up. My father almost let go of the reins. I grabbed his hand and held him back. The creature began to move toward the road, slowly but surely. Each step was heavy and confident. My father yelled at me to hold on. He jerked the reins to the right and whipped Jake. The horse lurched forward. The wagon jerked. I fell to the floor, hitting my shoulder on the edge of the bench. My father pulled on the reins, trying to keep the direction. Jake galloped, almost blindly in the fog. The wheels bounced over the bumps, and the wagon swayed from side to side. I heard the crack of branches on the left, heavy footsteps. It was running parallel to the road. Fast, monstrously fast for its size. My father yelled at the horse. He whipped it relentlessly. The footsteps grew closer. I turned my head and looked to the left. The creature was running between the trees. Its body flashed in the gaps, huge, dark, covered with fur. Its arms moved in time with its steps, almost touching the ground. Its head was lowered forward, its eyes glowing orange. It was picking up speed. My father swung his musket with one hand, holding the reins with the other. He aimed in the direction of the footsteps. He fired. The roar was deafening. Smoke filled the space around us. The pounding stopped for a moment. Then it resumed. Closer. The road made a sharp turn to the left. My father didn't have time to react. The cart skidded. The right wheel crashed into a stump on the side of the road. The impact was strong. The wagon tilted, froze on two wheels, then collapsed back down. The axle cracked with a loud crunch. Jake roared, froze in place, trembling all over. And then it jumped out. From the forest on the left, across the road, a huge shadow in the fog. The roar filled the space, making the air vibrate. It was 10 feet away. I could see it clearly. 8.5 feet tall, maybe 9. The body was massive, muscular, covered with thick, dark gray-brown fur with flashes of black. The fur was long, 3 or 4 inches, especially on the back and shoulders. It was sparser on the chest, revealing dark skin. The face was terrifyingly human, wide with prominent cheekbones and brow ridges like an ancient man. The nose is flat and wide, the nostrils large and open. The mouth is large, the lips thick. When it roars, large yellowish teeth are visible. The incisors are massive, the canines are not pronounced, but the jaws are powerful, capable of crushing bone. The eyes are deep set under heavy brow ridges. They glow with a bright orange-red light from within. Not a reflection, a glow. When it looks at you, those eyes pierce right through you, and you can sense a primitive, malicious mind behind them. The shoulders are broad, twice as wide as a human's. The chest is barrel-shaped. The neck is short and thick, and the head is pressed into the shoulders. The arms are disproportionately long, hanging below the knees. The palms are huge, the size of a dinner plate, the fingers thick with black-clawed nails about an inch long, broken at the ends. On the left side of the chest, there is an old scar, a wide strip without fur, light against the dark skin. It grabbed his father. A huge hand shot forward, fingers clasping my father's shoulder. The claws tore through his leather jacket and dug into his flesh. My father screamed. The creature began to pull him from the cart. I didn't think. My hands moved on their own. There were stones for ballast under the seat. I grabbed one and threw it at the creature. I missed. I grabbed a second one. I threw it. It hit the shoulder. The creature didn't even flinch. The third stone, sharp, fist-sized. I threw it with all my might. The stone hit the creature in the left eye. The roar stopped. The creature let go of my father and grabbed its face with both hands. Its head fell back, and a series of piercing screams burst from its throat, one after another, deafening. My father fell to the bottom of the wagon. Blood flowed from his shoulder, soaking his jacket. I grabbed the iron rod from the spare wheel. It was heavy, 3 feet long. The creature lowered its hands from its face. Its left eye was closed, blood seeping between its fingers where it held the wound. Its right eye burned brighter, fixed on me. It swung. Its arm swept over the wagon. I saw its palm, its fingers, its claws. I struck with the rod. The iron sank into the creature's arm with a dull thud. Bone or flesh, I don't know, but it pulled its limb back and roared again. Then cries of response came from the forest. 2, maybe 3 voices, the same as this creature's. Close, very close. The creature in front of us froze. Its head turned toward the cries. Then back to us. It let out one last roar. Long, strained, almost like a scream. Then it turned and ran into the forest. breaking branches, crushing the undergrowth, panting heavily. The screams from the forest grew louder, closer. My father raised himself up on his elbow. His face was white, his lips pressed together. His shoulder was covered in blood. 4 parallel lacerations ran from his shoulder to his chest, deep, the edges of the skin torn. He told me to take the reins. I grabbed the reins. I whipped Jake. The horse surged forward. The broken axle creaked, the wagon shook, but the wheels turned. We raced forward. I didn't look back. I whipped again and again. Jake galloped, foam flying from his lips, his eyes rolled back. The shouts remained behind us. Gradually, they faded away. But I kept driving the horse for another mile until the road led us to an open area where the forest receded and you could see the sky. Only then did I stop. My father lay at the bottom of the wagon, his hand pressed against the wound. Blood flowed between his fingers, dripping onto the boards. His face was gray, his breathing rapid and shallow. I tore the hem of my dress and tied it around his shoulder as tightly as I could. The blood soaked through the fabric in seconds, but the flow slowed. Father opened his eyes. He looked at me. He said we had to go home. Not to town. Home. I turned the cart around. The broken axle prevented us from going fast, but Jake moved steadily, even though he was breathing heavily. We drove through that part of the forest again. This time we didn't stop or look around. I held the reins tightly, watching the road and the light that was beginning to fade behind the trees. There were no more tracks. No more screams either. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. We reached Collins's farm with the last of the light. The old man ran out of the house when he heard the sound of hooves. He saw my father, the blood, my face. He didn't ask any questions. He just helped carry my father into the house, laid him on the bed, and sent his son to town for the doctor. The doctor arrived 2 hours later. He examined the wounds, washed them with alcohol, and stitched them with thick thread. He said the wounds were deep and infection was almost inevitable. He left opium tincture for the pain and instructed us to change the bandages every 4 hours. We stayed at Collins' house for the night. My father was delirious and screaming in his sleep. Collins sat by the door with his rifle and did not sleep until dawn. In the morning, we returned home. Collins helped us get there in his cart. My mother met us at the house with a cry. I helped my father to the door. My hands were covered in blood. My dress was torn, and my hair was full of leaves and dirt. The sun was rising over the forest we had escaped from. My father was sick for 3 weeks. The fever came on the 3rd day. His temperature rose so high that he did not recognize us, spoke in a language that did not exist, and tried to get up and run away. The wounds became infected, and pus oozed out despite washing. The doctor came every day and wanted to amputate his arm in the 2nd week. My mother refused. She prayed at night. On the 17th day, the fever subsided. My father opened his eyes and recognized us. He asked for water. He survived. But his arm no longer worked as it had before. The muscles were too badly damaged. Deep scars remained. 4 parallel furrows from shoulder to chest, wide and white against his tanned skin. 2 years later, my father sold the farm. We moved to Marietta, a town on the Ohio River. He never went into the woods alone again. He didn't hunt or chop wood in remote areas. He worked in a hardware store selling nails and tools. He died in 1892 of a heart attack. He was 67 years old. Old hunter Ezra Collins disappeared a week after our attack. He went into the woods to check his traps and never returned. His sons searched for 3 days. They found only a rifle with a broken stock and shreds of clothing 50 yards from the nest we had seen. The body was never found. The Gallia County newspaper of November 17, 1869, carried a short note about a wild animal attacking a farmer and his daughter. No details were given. The authorities declared it a man-eating bear, organized a hunt, but found nothing. 3 years later, a couple of hunters from Middleport disappeared in the same forest. Then 2 more. In 1875, the local pastor organized a group of 12 men with dogs and weapons to drive the devil's spawn out of the forest. They returned 2 days later, pale and silent. One of them, Butcher William Jenks, went mad and spent the rest of his life in an insane asylum in Athens, repeating the same thing over and over. Eyes, orange eyes. There were 5 of them. 5. Nests were found in those forests until the early 1900s. Hunters stumbled upon them, but no one stayed around for long. After the mass deforestation for the railroad in 1901-1903, the encounters ceased. The forest receded, cities expanded, factories began to smoke. I married Thomas Baker, a blacksmith's son, at the age of 22. I gave birth to 4 children. I lived a long life in Marietta, working as a seamstress, then helping my husband in the smithy with orders. All my life, I refused to drive through those woods. I made a 5-mile detour even when the children laughed and said it was silly. I didn't explain. I just didn't drive there. Sometimes I told the story to my grandchildren. I showed them the scars on my father's shoulder when he was still alive. They listened with wide eyes, then asked if it was true. I said yes. Before I died in 1923, when I was 70 years old and my body was failing, I confessed something to my daughter that I had never told anyone else. I still see orange eyes in the dark in my dreams, every night when I close mine. They look at me from the same distance as before, and I know they are still there, in the dense forests of Ohio, where the trees grow thick and the fog hangs low over the ground. And if I ever hear that roar again, low, turning into a screech, holding 2 notes at once, I won't ask what it is. I'll just close the door, turn off the light, and pray that it passes by.